Hello again, Steve here with a little coffee chat on something that I think is very important. Those of you who know me fairly well know that I hosted a thing called Coffee Chat, mostly in Saskatoon, but somewhat in Southern Ontario and somewhat in BC for a while, the West Coast. And this was a discussion group on topics that would help us to improve the quality of our life experiences. And isn't that what we really want, right? If we really drill down as to why we're doing anything, we find that there are underlying reasons, right? We want to find the love of our lives because we want to feel loved. We want to get in shape because perhaps we want to lose some weight. We want to look better. There's deep lying imperatives that we want, right? If we're feeling we want to make some money, maybe because we feel we don't have quite enough, and that helps to give us a security. All those things like security, love, and whatnot are not things that we can pick up and knock on like a piece of wood. They are qualities. We call them qualities of life or emotion, right? And that's kind of how we want to live as much as we can, right? As creatures. Now, for us to improve the quality of our lives, just like if we're going to improve the quality of a loaf of bread, or we're going to make a better mousetrap, or we're going to improve the performance of our automobile, we have to know something about it, right? In fact, we have to drill down and find out as much as we can about it. And this is why the old sayings from going way back, know thyself, right? And to thine own self be true, I believe it was Shakespeare who said. So it's important to know something about self. So on a simple examination, this is really a never-ending, a bottomless examination as to what is self, I suppose. But we can come to terms with what the practical side of ourselves is, for sure, in terms of what it is that we have to work with, right? I think that's important. So I'll just go through what I see, and once again, I like to come down to common denominators and be as honest as I can with myself as to what it is that I have to work with. Number one, body, right? We all have a body. If we don't, then we are extraterrestrials or perhaps ethereal bodies, and in which case I'm the wrong guy to be talking to because I don't know much about that. But we have that. And the way the body, in plain terms, as we understand, experiences the world is through senses, right? Touch, smell, feel. Well, that's touch, I guess. Um, pain, taste, smell, hearing, these sorts of things. Don't know if I got them all, but these are senses, and they can be on a spectrum of pleasure or pain, right? I mean, if something just touches your finger very lightly, that can feel good sometimes. Or if something hits it with a hammer, you hit it with a hammer, it doesn't feel good. So we know what side of that spectrum we prefer to be on. And you can see that showing up in very simple creatures, right? Anybody who's ever gone fishing knows that when you try to bait the hook put a worm on the hook, the worm you can sense, you can understand, and you can sense by the way it moves, actually feels that and doesn't prefer that. It would prefer to be left alone because it kind of squirms. So a very rudimentary animal like a worm certainly would have senses. The next aspect of ourselves and the tools that we have within ourselves, you might say, or as ourselves, as our package, is what I'm going to call the mind-body, that connection. And how it senses the world is through emotions, what I'm going to call emotions. And this seems to be more of a subconscious mind, if you will, but it's directly connected to the body because people will have some things like gut feelings as a result of an emotion, right? So there's actually a physiological effect that takes place in, say, the gut with a certain emotion. And we see this very much in animals. Animals can become very spooked and they will get nervous and so on. And so they have this subconscious mind, body, emotion aspect to them. So do children very much so. And the scale for us as individuals, in terms of quality of life, seems to be a scale somewhere between, very happy and despair, right? And everything else in between. So we prefer to have the emotions riding through in our lives that are along the lines of happiness, I would say. In fact, the ancient philosophers and so on used to talk about happiness as the ultimate the ultimate goal, the experience that we really want in life is happiness. And I don't think there's much arguing with that. The other aspect that we have of ourselves as human beings is what I'm going to call the higher mind, the mind of reason, or the mind of intellect. And this seems to be very unique to humans. At least it is very, very much larger in humans than anybody else. And if we want to study these things, these aspects of ourselves, we can easily see that. A lot of us have done this through biology. You study the body and its senses and so on. You study that through physiology, right? There's lots of evidence and lots of study done on neurology and so on, and the nervous system and how that bioelectronic system actually works, and the feedbacks and so on. In the emotion, and of course the body senses, they show up in all sentient beings as far as I know, animalistic, animal type beings as far down as the earthworm. It seems to be a few, even ants and so on, if you shine a light on them, they'll try to run away from the light. Emotions, and they show up in animals too. They show up in children, they show up in men and women. And the way we study emotions, I think, a lot of that has to do with psychology, I would say. Because after all, if you look at the origin of the word psychology, a lot of people think that's mind, but it's actually soul, right? The psyche is actually the soul in Greek. So it's going even deeper than mind. So it's digging deeper within ourselves into that lower mind, that mind body. And I think this gets experienced very often through religion. I'm going to come back to that a little bit because I think that it is important. And the other aspect is the reason, right? And reason doesn't seem to show up, the intellect doesn't seem to show up very much in animals, though, there's some evidence that higher apes and so on can learn how to talk with sign language and that, and perhaps they can reason on a very, very low level. But certainly, orders of magnitude above that is man, right? Human beings. And of course, men, women, and children to a lesser extent as they start to get older. Certain churches used to talk about the age of reason, right? When people eventually get to the point where they can work through on a reasonable level. And this is studied mostly through philosophy, right? The philosophical reasonings. Like if you look at, say, Aristotle's Aristotelian way of questioning, and Socrates and so on, these philosophers, they learned how to use the mind systematically, and from that we get science, right? And science is a logical approach through skepticism, which is that unless I have evidence and or reason, in other words, it's a logical flow from one to the other based on systematic thought, then we can come to conclusions. So that's how the logical mind works, and I think that human beings are, one of perhaps the only sentient animal that actually does that on a very, very high level. Now I want to talk a little bit about the differences between, I think, men and women, and the role that religion plays a lot in our lives and through the lives of human beings, and perhaps is a remnant or a relic of our evolutionary past, and perhaps still plays a huge part in that. Now, I think women tend to be more emotional, and men tend to be more reasoned. So women tend to be more of the mind body, men tend to be more of the mind. And the reason I say that is because based on our roles that we played in our evolutionary past, right? If you think about the role women played, women were pregnant, lactating, breastfeeding, looking after babies. That was their primary role in society. And men's primary role, traditionally in the hunter-gatherer times, which is not that long ago in our evolutionary past, were the ones who did the hunt. And in the hunt, of course, you had to coordinate with a team, and you had to coordinate with a team of dogs very often to take down some very dangerous animals. And this required more than just emotion. It required calculation and connecting the dots from one adult man to another adult man, and being able to direct dogs and animals all at the same time. It was a form of warfare, or chess. If you ever played a game of chess, this is not an emotional game. This is a very rational, mathematical, calculated game. It's a very calculated, logical sequence of events. Whereas women traditionally, we're looking after very small children and babies. I don't know if you ever noticed, but it's pretty hard to be intellectual or to reason with a child. Yet, very important things have to get communicated in sometimes an instant. A woman has to be able to walk into a room in the middle of the night with a screaming baby and know to a great degree what it is that that baby needs versus another kind of scream. There's an intellectual or there's an emotional connection that predates our reason, I would say. And I would say that women have a more practiced and developed form of that, generally speaking. I'm talking in generalities here, than men, right? And I think this is why religion has been very much used. You see, men and women use the sense, use the notion or the nature of the other sex in order to captivate them, right? So for men to be very attractive to women, they must somehow eventually be romantic. And romantic is a very emotional thing. It's not a reason thing. You know, it's not like we're going to calculate what our romance is going to be. No, it's a natural thing. It's rather poetic. This is why, you know, certain people will read poetry and give certain flowers and whatever. It's all this, right? It's very feely. It's that uplift of the spirit. And that's attractive to women sometimes, not so much to men. And women who want to connect with their guys have got to learn how to sit down and say, so, how did that engine change go today? Did you get the head planed down properly? So that the valves are all working properly? You know, and guys, that's why guys get together sometimes. They want to chit-chat about, they want to go into their man caves and they want to talk about things that are very calculating and very empirically real, right? Whereas women, when they get together, they talk about feelings and so on. So coming back to religion, religion talks about things that are not empirically real, right? In a way, if we think about it, religion goes back to our childhood. It goes back to fantasies, and it makes them real, just like we had make-believe when we were kids. But it makes us feel good. And good religion helps to exercise the good feelings of our emotions. And I heard Gavin McInnes talk, and he used to be an atheist not long ago, and he recently became a Christian. And he finds that, even if he can't explain it, going to church has this uplift for him, the particular church he goes to. Yes, there are some that are not as good, perhaps, because of the way they do it. But nevertheless, he finds that. And I think there's a reason why, religion appealing to the emotion, appealing to the soul, if you will, appealing to the psychological nature of us, is more attractive to women in general. Often you'll find that women will retain their religiosity. In my family, I come from a large family. I don't think any of the boys are religious, and all of the girls are wildly religious, right? And I see this over and over again. Very often it was the mother who would take the kids out, and the guy was, go ahead, honey, that's fine. Interesting, isn't it? And also, what's also interesting, that usually the leaders of these organizations, even if it's in the Catholic Church it was always required, but even where it's not required, still it's dominated by men. And I think this is the reason is because they're appealing to women. Like, men's nature is to appeal to women, and women's nature is to appeal to men, traditionally. And the appeal of religion is mostly a feminine thing because it is appealing to emotions and fantasy, which is what emotions often do, because we can't really quantify the emotion. It's just a feeling. It's like a gut feeling, right? Whereas the reason, we have to have evidence or a logical breakdown of how we got there. So I think it's important for our quality of life to understand ourselves and to understand the nature of what we are as a makeup: body, mind, and mind, and the role that the physical senses play, the roles that the emotions play, and the roles that reason and intellect play. Hope this was helpful. Steve here again. Great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.